Michael Grant had built Crestline Technologies from a scrappy startup into a Fortune 500 powerhouse, a company often hailed in industry magazines as a model of innovation and corporate ethics. With over 12,000 employees across multiple sites, Michael had always believed that treating people with dignity was not only the right thing to do, but smart business. Year after year, internal surveys showed high job satisfaction, and accolades from workplace watchdogs lined the walls of Crestline's headquarters. So when the board suggested an internal audit of overnight operations based on a few concerning rumors, Michael had laughed it off. "We've got nothing to hide," he told them confidently. But that changed the moment the envelope landed on his desk. It looked ordinary, white-sealed, unmarked, until he opened it and discovered something that sent a chill through his spine. The message inside wasn't handwritten or typed. It had been pieced together with letters cut from magazines, glued with precision, like something out of a thriller movie. "Your perfect company is built on broken backs. Look closer at the night shift." It read. Alongside the note was a USB drive. At first, Michael thought it was some prank or baseless accusation from a disgruntled ex-employee, but when he plugged the drive into his secure laptop, the files told a story he couldn't ignore. Inside were timecard records showing employees clocking in for 14, 16, even 20-hour shifts day after day. The timestamps didn't make sense, and they didn't match the official HR schedules. Next came the surveillance footage. Employees slumped over break room tables at 3 a.m., clearly too exhausted to drive home. One clip showed a woman asleep at her desk, jerking awake to answer a ringing phone. But most damning of all was a series of emails between mid-level HR managers with instructions on how to smooth out overtime records to avoid drawing scrutiny. Someone or several someones were actively concealing these violations. Michael sat back in his chair, hands steepled in front of his face, his heart pounding. This wasn't just about policy violations. It was about human lives being quietly pushed to the edge. And if these files were real, it meant that Crestline's night shift culture had evolved into something toxic under his very nose. That night, Michael made a decision few CEOs would even consider. He wouldn't launch an investigation from the top down. Instead, he would go to the ground floor, literally. Within 72 hours, Michael had arranged a full identity swap. His trusted assistant helped forge a new employee file under the name Mike Harper, and Crestline's facilities team outfitted him with a janitor's badge uniform and access credentials. He left his tailored suits behind, let a few days' stubble grow in, and memorized the cleaning supply closet layout, like his life depended on it. On a quiet Tuesday night at 1:45 a.m., Michael stood in the fluorescent-lit lobby of Crestline's downtown office tower with a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. The first thing he noticed wasn't the silence. It was the weight. The whole building, usually bustling with meetings and pitches during the day, now echoed with a hollow energy, quiet but not peaceful. As he pushed the mop down the corridor, he passed darkened cubicles, flickering vending machines, and the occasional glow of a computer screen still on. He wasn't sure what he expected, maybe to catch someone nodding off or breaking protocol, but what he found instead was something more invisible and dangerous: routine, exhaustion. Over the next few nights, Michael started to piece together the nighttime world of Crestline. He watched employees cycle through double and triple shifts, sometimes clocking in before sunset and leaving after sunrise. He noticed how most of the vending machines had no real food, just sugary snacks and energy drinks. In the break rooms, people didn't talk. They slept. Their eyes were sunken, their movements robotic, but nobody complained. Nobody said a word. It was as if they had all silently agreed this was just the way it was now, and the scariest part, no one at the top seemed to know. By the end of that first week, Michael understood the truth. The anonymous letter was not an exaggeration. It was a warning, a desperate attempt to shine a light on something that had been hidden in plain sight. The night shift at Crestline wasn't just overworked. It was collapsing under a system that rewarded silence, punished rest, and overlooked humanity. As he wiped sweat from his brow and dumped his mop water into the janitor's sink, Michael knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to be a standard investigation. This was personal, and he was just getting started. The first time Michael Grant saw Jessica Carter, she looked like a ghost of someone much younger. It was just past 2 a.m., and he was wiping down the glass doors of the East Wing when a voice called out behind him, "You're new, right?" He turned to find a woman standing there, her eyes ringed with exhaustion so deep it seemed permanent. She offered a weary smile as she sipped from a dented thermos. Her Crestline badge read, "Jessica Carter, Customer Support," though her tone carried none of the cheer typical of service roles. Michael, still holding on to his Mike Harper identity, nodded and offered a quick rehearsed introduction. Jessica welcomed him to the night shift, adding that the executives liked their floors shining by sunrise. Her voice was soft, polite, but distant, like someone who had spent too long being overlooked. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael saw Jessica more than anyone else. No matter what time he started or ended his shift, she was always there. During the night, she fielded calls from irate customers with an uncanny calm. By morning, she had shifted roles entirely, typing away at data entry in another corner of the floor. She moved like someone carrying invisible weight, her motions practiced and unhesitating, but her eyes hollow. What startled Michael most was that according to her employee file, which he had quietly accessed during the day, she was only registered for a single full-time position. Yet she appeared to be doing the work of 3 different people. He even overheard her declining overtime pay during a brief hallway exchange with a supervisor. "Just count it as regular hours," she whispered, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. The supervisor, visibly uncomfortable, nodded without question. Michael couldn't help but notice other patterns. Jessica always brought the same meal, an apple, and a small thermos of coffee. No sandwich, no salad, not even a snack bar. Just those 2 items consumed slowly over the course of long hours. Occasionally, co-workers offered her bits of their lunches, but she always declined with a quiet smile. Her body language suggested gratitude, but also shame. Once he spotted her holding the apple for nearly 20 minutes before taking the first bite. Her hands were trembling slightly as she lifted it to her mouth. That same day, she worked through her supposed lunch break and was still at her desk when Michael left 8 hours later. Her physical condition raised even more concerns. She had a persistent cough that she tried to hide with sips from her thermos. Her posture, once upright and alert in the early hours, would sag by sunrise, her shoulders slumped and eyes barely open. Michael began to wonder if she was sleeping at all. When he passed by the customer support center during one of his late-night rounds, he saw her massaging her wrists between calls, flexing her fingers like someone fighting chronic pain. But whenever anyone walked by, she sat up straighter, smiled faintly, and resumed typing at full speed. It was an act one Michael had seen in struggling employees before, but never this refined, never this desperate. On a particularly cold Thursday morning, Michael noticed her cardigan was missing. She wore only a thin, faded blouse and hugged herself against the chill of the air conditioning. Still, she made no complaint. That morning, he caught a glimpse of something that made his stomach twist. A faint bruise on the inside of her wrist, quickly covered when she adjusted her sleeve. When their eyes met, she smiled and mumbled something about being clumsy when tired. Michael nodded politely, but the image stayed with him all day. It didn't look like an accidental bump. It looked like pressure, the kind left behind by someone grabbing too hard. The puzzle pieces were starting to form a picture, and it wasn't a pretty one. Jessica Carter wasn't just tired, she was burning out, and no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they did and chose to look away. Michael found himself thinking about her more and more long after his shifts ended. Who worked 3 jobs and refused overtime? Who brought only coffee and an apple for a 16-hour stretch? And why did it all feel like she was hiding something? He had been expecting to find policy violations or poor management. What he found instead was a person quietly breaking apart right under everyone's noses. By the end of his second week, Michael was no longer looking at spreadsheets or listening to boardroom chatter in his mind. He was thinking about Jessica. The late-night phone calls, the trembling hands, the silence during lunch hours. It all painted a picture of someone trapped. And while he didn't yet understand the cage, he knew one thing for sure. It was time to stop observing and start asking questions, because whatever Jessica was carrying, she shouldn't have to carry it alone. It was a little past 3:00 a.m. On a Friday, when Michael found Jessica sitting alone in the darkened employee break room, her back turned to the vending machines, her shoulders hunched forward and her face dimly lit by the glow of her phone screen. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of a refrigerator and the occasional creak from the floor above. At first, he thought she might be on a call, but as he moved closer, he saw her quickly wipe her cheeks. Her hands shook as she fumbled to close a messaging app. "Sorry," she mumbled, her voice cracking with fatigue, and something deeper, something more fragile. Just, just having a moment. Michael, still in his janitor uniform, set his mop against the counter and slowly sat across from her. For a few long seconds, neither of them said anything. The fluorescent light above them flickered softly, casting long shadows that seemed to echo the weight in the room. After a moment, Jessica broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mike, you've been around a few weeks now. You seem kind. Can I ask you something weird?" Michael nodded gently. Of course. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. "The cafeteria, they throw out the food that doesn't sell right. Sandwiches, salads. It all just gets tossed at the end of the night." Michael felt his chest tighten. He'd heard versions of this question before in other companies, in other break rooms. Employees too proud to ask for help, but too desperate not to. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." "I think they do." Jessica hesitated, her voice quivering as she asked, Would you help me take some home?" The words came out quickly, like she was afraid of hearing them aloud, but just as fast, she backpedaled, shaking her head. "No, never mind. Forget. I said anything? I don't want to get you in trouble." Michael leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice calm. "It's no trouble, Jessica." But he paused, choosing his words. "You work so much. Surely you can afford?" She cut him off, eyes wide with sudden alarm. "It's not for me," she blurted out, then winced, as if regretting it. "I mean, thank you. Just a few sandwiches. It would help more than you know." Without another word, she pulled a faded backpack from beneath the table and began quietly collecting whatever food remained from the cafeteria fridge. 2 egg salad sandwiches, a container of fruit, a half-wrapped Caesar wrap. Michael watched in silence as she zipped the pack closed with care, her hands trembling ever so slightly, and then he saw it again, the bruise. As she shifted the bag onto her shoulder, her sleeve slipped back just enough to reveal the deep purplish mark on her wrist. Michael's eyes locked onto it, and for a moment he didn't move. Jessica noticed and quickly tugged her sleeve down. "Bumped into a door," she said with a half-laugh that sounded more like a rehearsed excuse. "I'm clumsy when I'm tired." She avoided his eyes, clutching the backpack tightly. "Thanks again, Mike. Really, I should get back to work." Before he could respond, she was on her feet, walking briskly down the hall, shoulders hunched, her figure slowly swallowed by the harsh corridor lights. Michael sat still for a long time after she left. His mop sat forgotten beside him, and the break room felt colder than before. In all his years leading Crestline Technologies, he'd prided himself on being able to read people, contracts, pitches, boardroom maneuvers. He could smell a lie from across the table. But Jessica wasn't lying. She was hiding exhaustion, hiding hunger, hiding bruises, and something told him, hiding more than he'd even begun to imagine. He thought about the anonymous letter again. "Your perfect company is built on broken backs." Was this what the writer had meant? Not numbers or policy loopholes, but people like Jessica, people quietly collapsing under the weight of a system that claimed to support them. That night, Michael didn't go home after his shift ended. Instead, he waited. He knew her schedule by now, knew she would clock out at 4:17 a.m. sharp. He positioned himself inside the fourth-floor supply closet, which offered a narrow but clear view of the parking lot. From behind a shelf of industrial cleaners, he watched as Jessica emerged into the early morning chill. Her backpack hugged tightly to her chest like a shield, She paused under a flickering security light, scanning the lot, with eyes that moved like prey, sensing a predator. Then she started walking fast, focused, alert. Michael didn't know exactly where she was going, but he knew this much. It wasn't just about salvaging food, it was about survival. And for the first time, he understood this wasn't an isolated hardship. It was a pattern, a system. And whatever she was walking toward, he needed to see it for himself. Michael kept a careful distance as Jessica made her way through the darkened city streets, her backpack strapped tightly to her shoulders, the weight of it not just physical but emotional. She boarded the last route bus heading south, and Michael followed 2 cars behind, having parked a borrowed maintenance sedan several blocks away. The city changed rapidly as they moved. Bright storefronts and cafes gave way to shuttered buildings, broken streetlights, and boarded-up windows. By the time Jessica got off, the skyline was barely recognizable. They were in an industrial district Michael hadn't visited in years, and even now it felt forgotten, like a part of the city that had simply stopped existing in the minds of those who had moved on. Jessica's pace quickened. She made several sharp turns, sometimes doubling back, always alert to her surroundings. Michael trailed her on foot, ducking into shadows and slipping behind dumpsters whenever she paused. She was being careful, deliberately evasive, as if she knew she might be followed. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. She stopped in front of what appeared to be an abandoned gymnasium. Its brick facade weathered the sign above the door, faded and cracked. Champions Athletic Club, Est, 1985. The front windows were covered with yellowed newspapers and black plastic, and the side alley was strewn with broken crates. Michael crouched behind a metal container as Jessica approached a side door. She knocked in a distinct rhythm, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. The door opened a crack just wide enough for her to slip inside, then it closed silent and deliberate. Michael waited 30 seconds, his heart pounding, then crept forward, listening carefully. From inside he could hear muffled sounds, not the sterile quiet of an abandoned building, but the unmistakable echo of life, children's laughter, the squeak of shoes on hardwood floors, someone humming. He found a sliver of window where the newspaper had peeled away and pressed his face close to the glass. What he saw inside made him forget to breathe. The gymnasium had been transformed into a makeshift community center. Folded gym mats lined the walls as bedding neatly arranged with care. Portable room dividers created pockets of privacy, some decorated with family photos and children's drawings. In one corner, battered computers were set up on folding tables where teenagers were typing heads, bent in concentration, and in the center of it all was Jessica. Her coat off her sleeves rolled, handing out sandwiches and salads from the backpack she had so carefully guarded. She knelt beside a small boy and ruffled his hair before giving him a juice box. A girl hugged her tightly after receiving a sandwich. She wasn't just distributing food, she was bringing joy, structure, and dignity. This wasn't a job. This was something deeper, something sacred. Beautiful sight, isn't it? The voice came from behind, and Michael nearly jumped out of his skin. He turned to find a tall, older man standing a few feet away, wearing a faded security uniform. His eyes were kind but sharp, and he made no move to threaten or question Michael's presence. The name stitched on his chest read, W. Harris. I was just... Michael stammered. You're the new janitor at Crestline, the man interrupted, extending a hand. Walter Harris. Jessica said you might follow her someday. Michael shook his hand, still trying to process what he'd seen. Walter gestured toward the building. We call it Haven House. It's not official, can't be not. With the permits we don't have and the rules we'd break, but this is the only roof some of these folks have. Families who fell through every crack the system offered. Some fled domestic abuse. Some lost everything to medical debt or loan sharks. All of them were out of options. Michael leaned back against the wall, overwhelmed. He watched as Jessica helped tuck in a group of younger children, handing each of them a fleece blanket before switching off a nearby light. She moved like someone who had done this 100 times. gentle but efficient, tired but never cold. She started here as a resident, Walter said softly, 3 years ago. Barely out of her 20s, caring for her dad and brother, but instead of leaving when things got better, she stayed. Keeps this place running with grit and grace, keeps these kids fed. His voice hardened, but lately, things have gotten more complicated. There are people who don't want this place to exist, people who profit from desperation, and they don't like someone out here giving folks another way. Inside, Jessica continued moving through the shelter, organizing dinner leftovers, checking on the older teens doing homework. Michael couldn't take his eyes off her. She was a different person here, not the quiet, exhausted worker he saw at night, but a leader, a protector. Her exhaustion was still visible, but now he understood its source. It wasn't just Crestline that was draining her. It was this place and everything it represented. She was carrying not just her own burdens, but the weight of a whole community, a shelter hiding in plain sight, a sanctuary being run by someone Crestline's system had overlooked, and now that Michael had seen it with his own eyes, he couldn't look away. Walter's voice was quieter now. "You came here for answers, didn't you?" Michael nodded slowly. "Then you've got them. But the real question is what you're going to do next." Michael didn't speak. Not right away. He stood there under the flickering alley light, the sounds of laughter and bedtime songs drifting out through the walls behind him. He had come looking for fraud, for policy failures, for maybe a few corrupt managers. What he had found was something far more profound, something that made everything else look small in comparison. And he knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Michael was still processing everything he had seen inside Haven House when a sudden shift in the atmosphere drew his attention back through the dusty window. The hum of warmth and quiet laughter that had filled the gym evaporated in an instant. Children scattered behind room dividers. Parents lowered their voices, and even Jessica, who had just been leading bedtime routines, froze mid-step. A tall figure entered through the front doors, a man dressed sharply in a dark, tailored suit, his expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood floor like a judge's gavel. He exuded power, not in a showy way, but in the cold, precise manner of someone used to owning every room he entered. His presence was not merely unwelcome, it was feared. Michael felt the tension in the air shift like a sudden drop in pressure before a storm. The man didn't speak at first. He didn't have to. Jessica stepped forward to meet him, placing herself physically between him and the nearest family, her hands shaking slightly, but her chin lifted. Through the crack in the window, Michael watched as the man extended his hand. Calm, expectant, Jessica pulled an envelope from her coat pocket and offered it without a word. The man didn't take it immediately. Instead, he leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear as he spoke. Jessica went pale, her body tensing as if bracing for impact. Then came the moment that made Michael's stomach twist when the man grabbed her wrist. It was the same wrist Michael had seen bruised days earlier. Jessica flinched but didn't pull away. She just stood there, silent, trembling, until he finally took the envelope and walked out the hardwood floor, echoing behind him. Michael's fists clenched at his sides. He didn't know who the man was yet, but he knew cruelty when he saw it. And this was cruelty wrapped in wealth and control. Behind him, Walter stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the door. The man had just exited through. "His name's Vincent Cole," he said. Voice low, real estate mogul, philanthropist on paper, owns half the pawn shops, payday, lenders and eviction services in this part of the city. What he really is, a predator in a three-piece suit. Michael turned toward him, trying to keep his anger contained. What does he want from her? Walter's jaw tightened. Jessica owes him. Or more accurately, her family did medical bills, student loans, a bad break with their dad's accident. He offered them a lifeline. One of those too good to be true family assistance packages. Low interest, no pressure. But hidden in the fine print were penalty clauses that turned a $20,000 loan into $200,000 in debt. Within a year, miss a payment, interest triples. Refuse a job placement from one of his partners. Default. Try to report it. Legal action. It's a trap, and once you're in it, you never get out. Michael stared back through the window as Jessica helped a group of teens re-emerge from their hiding spots, putting on a brave face, though her hands still shook. "And she's still paying him?" he asked Walter. Nodded slowly. "Every month, she picks up extra shifts at Crestline side jobs under fake names, anything she can to scrape together enough, and he lets her keep the shelter open for now because it makes him look charitable. But we both know that man doesn't do charity. He's just buying leverage. The minute she misses a payment or steps out of line, he'll take it all." Michael leaned against the wall, mind racing. He thought about the timesheet, discrepancies, the altered HR records, the anonymous letter. And for the first time, all the scattered pieces started to fit together. Cole wasn't just feeding off the shelter. He was embedded inside Crestline. Walter seemed to sense the shift in Michael's thinking. "He has people inside your company," he said quietly. "That's how he finds the most vulnerable night shift workers. People with medical debt, immigration concerns, families to feed. HR tips him off intentionally or not. Security turns a blind eye, and someone up top ensures no one asks questions." Michael's throat tightened. He had come looking for burnout and overtime abuse. What he had found was a machine. Quiet, sophisticated, ruthless, grinding people down and bleeding them dry. "So he's using my company," he said more to himself than to Walter. "Using Crestline as a funnel." Walter gave a grim nod. "And he's not alone. Men like Cole don't operate solo. They build networks, partnerships, protection." Michael's gaze hardened as he watched Jessica wipe her face quickly and return to the children kneeling beside a young girl with a flashlight and reading aloud from a picture book. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was strength in her yes, but also weariness. Bone-deep, soul-crushing weariness. The kind that came from fighting battles most people never saw and never would. "She shouldn't be doing this alone," Michael said. Walter looked him over. "Then don't let her." He stepped forward, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "But if you're going to take Cole on, you better be ready. He's got friends in city government, lawyers, judges, people who make things disappear, documents, records, even people. This isn't about broken systems anymore. This is about people who built those systems to serve themselves." Michael said nothing. He didn't have to. Inside him, something had shifted. Something final. This wasn't just about cleaning up Crestline's reputation. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about Jessica and the children, and the dozens, maybe hundreds of other people whose lives were being quietly consumed by men like Vincent Cole. As the last of the lights dimmed inside the shelter and the night grew still again, Michael knew what he had to do. He had walked into this as a CEO in disguise. Now he was something else entirely, a witness to something so broken it couldn't be ignored. And if Cole thought he could keep this hidden, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Michael didn't sleep the night after witnessing Vincent Cole's intimidation. He couldn't. The image of Jessica flinching when her wrist was grabbed replayed in his mind like a nightmare stuck on loop. The next evening, before the start of his janitor shift, he returned to Haven House. The children were already settling into their makeshift beds, the low hum of whispered bedtime stories and soft lullabies filling the gym's repurposed space. Jessica sat alone on one of the bleacher's arms, crossed tightly across her chest, her eyes scanning the room but clearly seeing something far away. When Michael approached, she didn't startle. She simply looked up at him with tired eyes and asked quietly, "You saw everything, didn't you?" Michael nodded, unsure of what to say. She let the silence linger before exhaling sharply and motioning for him to sit beside her. "He found Tommy," she whispered. "My little brother." Her voice cracked, not from drama but from exhaustion. Exhaustion laced with dread. "He was supposed to be safe. I sent him away for college. New name, new address. Everything. But Cole, he found him." She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and handed it to Michael. A message glowed on the screen, a blurry image of a young man, early 20s, walking on a college campus. Beneath it, just two words, "Time's up." Michael felt his chest tighten as she took the phone back and stared at the photo, like it might disappear if she blinked too fast. He's going to offer him the same deal he offered me. Help your sister. Be a man. Take on part of her debt. Her voice was bitter, trembling. And if Tommy says yes, that's it. He gets pulled into the same hell, working 16-hour shifts at fake jobs, funneling every dollar to Phoenix Financial, getting threatened if he even thinks about asking for help. I spent years trying to keep him away from all this. And now it's at his door. She wiped her face with her sleeve and stood up, pacing in small circles like someone caged by invisible walls. "You don't know what it's like," she said, her tone rising. Not in anger, but desperation. "The contracts look clean. Legal, but they're poison. Miss one payment and interest, triples, refuse a shift, default. Try to leave town. They send someone to your door, and you don't even get the paycheck. It all goes straight to the lender, to Cole's shell companies. You become a ghost with a name on paper, but no freedom left." Her voice cracked. "You don't live, you survive." If you're lucky, Michael had heard of wage theft and worker exploitation before, but this was something far more sinister. A full-blown system designed to keep people in debt forever. It wasn't just predatory. It was predation institutionalized. "And Crestline?" he asked quietly. Jessica gave a bitter laugh. "Crestline is one of the perfect partner companies, big enough to hide things, enough departments to shuffle names around. You think I want to work double shifts there? I hate it, but it's the only place where I can blend in, keep tabs and collect just enough money to keep the debt collectors at bay." Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And this shelter, Haven House." Jessica finally looked him in the eye. There was steel behind the sadness now. "This is the only thing keeping me sane. It started as a place to sleep after work, then someone else showed up. Single mom evicted hiding from an abusive partner. Then a dad with 3 kids and nowhere to go after medical bills wiped them out. I realized I couldn't save everyone, but I could help some. So I started building something, a place where people could rest, regroup, plan an escape." She pointed to the far side of the gym, where a few older kids were working quietly on old laptops. "We've helped 15 families leave the city. New IDs, bus tickets, job leads, in states where Cole's reach doesn't stretch yet. We don't have much, but we have each other. This place, it's more than a shelter. It's an underground railroad for the financially enslaved." She paused, then added, "And we're running out of time. The more people we help, the closer Cole watches, the more dangerous it gets." Michael was silent for a long time, staring out at the dim light filtering through the boarded windows. He thought of Crestline's executive board of shareholder meetings, filled with talk of market growth and ESG ratings, and he thought of this woman, exhausted, overworked, exploited, still standing tall because she had refused to let her own suffering be the end of her story. "Jessica," he said quietly, "you're risking everything." She nodded. "And I'll keep doing it until Cole is gone, or I am." Michael stood beside her, the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like never before. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "You don't have to keep doing this alone." And for the first time since he'd met her, Jessica didn't flinch. She didn't smile either, but her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the beginning of something close. And Michael knew in that moment this wasn't just a story about justice anymore. It was about redemption, hers, his, and maybe even Crestline's. The air inside Haven House was heavy with tension when Walter gestured for Michael to follow him to a small, locked office tucked behind a stack of donated supply crates. Jessica had just finished organizing the children for bed, but Michael could see the weight of everything she had shared still lingered in her eyes. Walter's usual calm demeanor had shifted. His voice was lower-clipped, deliberate. Once they were inside, he closed the door, drew the blinds, and pulled a weathered duffel bag from beneath a folding table. He unzipped it, slowly revealing folders, flash drives, and a sealed case marked with an official emblem. Michael's breath caught when he recognized the insignia. Department of Justice. I wasn't always security, Walter said, his voice no longer casual, but commanding. Name's not really Walter Harris either. My full name is Marcus Walker. I'm a senior field agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I've been embedded in this city for over 3 years. Michael stared, stunned. Marcus Walter nodded, as if confirming the shock on Michael's face. We've been tracking Vincent Cole for nearly a decade, but he's slippery. He hides behind legitimate businesses, philanthropic donations, and legal contracts that are technically sound but morally rotten. The debt network is real, but Cole isn't at the top. He never was. Michael took a step back, letting the words sink in. He had assumed Cole was the head of the snake, the architect of the suffering, the predator exploiting the desperate. But Marcus shook his head. Cole is the muscle, the enforcer, the face the victims see. But the real brain behind this system, that would be Charles. Brennan Michael's stomach dropped. Brennan, the chairman of Crestline's board. Marcus nodded. And your mentor, I believe. He walked over to a whiteboard pinned with maps, photos, and red string connecting names and companies. In the center was a large photo of Brennan smiling, confident, surrounded by lawmakers and Fortune 500 CEOs. He built this? Marcus continued tapping the photo. Cole just runs it. Brennan uses shell companies to funnel capital into failing businesses, then installs friendly executives to restructure operations. Behind the scenes, those businesses become funnels for cheap labor, thanks to debt entrapment schemes. Employees like Jessica are placed there strategically. They don't even know they're being moved like pawns. They think they're getting second chances. But really, it's about control. Michael's mind reeled. It wasn't just Crestline. How many companies, he asked. Marcus turned his laptop toward him. 12. That we know of. Coast to coast. Manufacturing plants, shipping firms, nursing homes, fast food chains, anywhere with high turnover and low oversight. Michael gripped the edge of the table. And no one's exposed this. Marcus let out a dry laugh. People have tried. Whistleblowers, investigative journalists, a few former employees. But every time something goes wrong, evidence disappears. Cases stall, people vanish. He leaned in closer. They've built a system too big to fail, one that wraps itself in legality while bleeding people dry. And the worst part, the longer it runs, the more it normalizes abuse as a business strategy. Michael looked down at the files on the table, transcripts of hidden recordings, internal HR emails, contracts signed by terrified hands. This wasn't a theory. It was a machine, cold, profitable, ruthless. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Outside, the hum of a distant siren echoed, mixing with the soft murmurs of a city trying to sleep. Michael finally broke the silence. Why tell me now? Marcus gave him a hard look. Because you're the only one inside who might have the power to bring it down. You're not just a janitor anymore. Michael, you're the CEO of one of their central hubs, and whether you like it or not, Brennan trusts you. That gives us a window, but it won't stay open long. Michael swallowed hard. He had come into this undercover operation thinking he would find burnout, mismanagement, maybe a few bad actors. What he had found was a national conspiracy wrapped in quarterly profits and corporate silence. Marcus pulled out a final folder and handed it to him. Inside was a detailed timeline, names, addresses, financial transfers, all tying Crestline to Cole and Cole to Brennan. We're close, Marcus said. But without someone inside, we're dead in the water. I've already lost agents, families. Jessica isn't the only one living in fear. But if we move now with you, we might be able to stop this before Brennan buries it again. Michael stared at the photo of Brennan, once a trusted advisor, now revealed as the mastermind of an invisible empire of human suffering. He closed the folder slowly. Then we move, he said quietly. We stop him. All of them. Marcus didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed just slightly. Then let's get to work. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Jessica said something that stopped Michael in his tracks. She was sorting through some leftover sandwiches in Haven House's small storage room, packing them into bags to distribute to the late arrivals, when she muttered, "He always knows when the cameras are down." Michael, standing by the doorway, narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" She looked up, slightly startled, as if she hadn't realized she'd spoken aloud. "Cole," she clarified. "Every time something shady happens, someone gets cornered, threatened, pushed into a deal. It's when the cameras conveniently aren't working. Not just here at Crestline too, it's like he has a sixth sense, or someone tipping him off." She paused, then added, "No one ever talks about it, but we all noticed that single sentence lit a fire in Michael's mind. He'd been focused on the loan contracts, the fraudulent HR records, and the network of shell companies tying Crestline to Phoenix Financial. But surveillance, if Cole could manipulate or monitor security feeds, then everything they'd done, every conversation, every covert step taken, might already be known. That same night, Michael met with Marcus, still using the alias Walter for the public-facing side of his work in Haven House's makeshift operations room. Michael replayed Jessica's words, and as soon as he finished, Marcus stood abruptly and pulled out his tablet. "If that's true," he said, tapping quickly on the screen, "then we've been compromised from day one, and it also means we're sitting on the biggest opportunity yet." By sunrise, they had snuck into Crestline's central security hub. With Michael's CEO credentials and Marcus's federal clearance, they bypassed all the traditional access protocols. Crestline used a third-party security vendor, Orion Systems, a company that provided 24/7 surveillance across all sites, from office floors to delivery bays. Marcus pulled logs from the past 12 months and overlaid them with timestamps from key incidents Jessica and others had described: missing footage, broken timestamps, unexplained technical malfunctions. What they found chilled them both. Every critical moment, Jessica's extended shifts going unrecorded, food going missing, employees cornered in parking garages lined up perfectly with reported outages. But these weren't accidental. They were triggered, deliberate, the deeper Marcus dug, the clearer the picture became. The cameras weren't just being disabled, they were being redirected. Orion's infrastructure had been silently feeding real-time data to an external server located off-site, and that server was registered to a holding company based in Delaware, a known shell linked to Vincent Cole. "He's been watching everything," Marcus muttered, running a hand over his face. "He's had access to employee routines, shift schedules, vulnerable entry points, and probably even internal emails. He's been 2 steps ahead because we've been playing chess on a board." He built. Michael felt physically ill. Not only had Crestline's security system failed to protect its people, it had been weaponized against them. And worse, he had unknowingly signed off on the very contracts that made it possible. But in that horror came opportunity. "If he's still watching," Michael said slowly, "then we can feed him what we want him to see." Marcus looked up, interest sparked. "A surveillance trap." Michael nodded. "We let him believe everything's business as usual. Meanwhile, we collect real-time footage of his agents, his threats, even his communications. If we can redirect the system and mirror it, make it seem like a glitch, a routine update, let him lower his guard." Marcus's grin was grim but approving. "That's bold, risky. But if we time it right, it could work. We could have hard proof. Video, audio, digital logs. Enough to make it impossible for Brennan and Cole to deny." They spent the next 48 hours carefully building the trap. Marcus brought in a trusted tech specialist from the Bureau, someone who could rewrite the back-end code of the security infrastructure without triggering alerts. Meanwhile, Michael staged a few routine executive inspections to justify the tech team's presence. Jessica played her part too, acting exactly as she always had. Though now she knew someone was watching, her courage became the centerpiece of their plan. The bait wasn't just the shelter, it was her. They had to make Cole believe she was on the edge, vulnerable, desperate enough to slip, to reach out for help, and to be punished. On the night of the operation, Michael stood outside Haven House, his janitor's uniform still on, but his role entirely different now. Every camera on the perimeter had been quietly reprogrammed to record and relay to both Cole's server and a secure FBI backup. Every mic in the building was activated, every timestamp cross-verified. Jessica walked through the front doors at 11:03 p.m., carrying the same backpack she'd been using for years, but tonight it wasn't just filled with food, it was filled with history and truth and proof. They weren't just hoping to catch Cole slipping, they were daring him to come out into the open. As Michael watched her disappear into the building, his heart pounded, not from fear, but from purpose. The trap had been laid. The players were in motion, and for the first time since this began, Michael felt like the ground was shifting beneath the criminal's feet, not his. The surveillance system they had relied on to control, to intimidate, to manipulate, it was about to become the very thing that exposed them. And when it did, the world would finally see what Jessica Marcus and so many others had been trying to survive all along. The cold was biting that night as Michael, Jessica, and Walter approached the old gymnasium that once served as a haven for so many. Haven House looked different now, eerily dark. The windows blacked out, no soft glow of night lights inside, no sound of laughter or late-night lullabies. It had been emptied, quieted, silenced. Michael's footsteps echoed too loudly as he crossed the concrete lot. Jessica walked beside him, chin up, her backpack clenched in her hand like a shield. Walter now fully Agent Marcus. Walker flanked them, his eyes scanning the shadows, his demeanor alert, but focused. As they reached the side door, it opened before they could knock. Standing in the entrance, as smug as ever was, Vincent Cole. His suit was pristine, his tie gleaming under the floodlight above the door. Behind him, inside the darkened gym, sat Charles Brennan at a polished mahogany desk, placed absurdly at center court, as if mocking the humble spirit the building once represented. "Come in," Cole said smoothly, stepping aside. "We've been expecting you." The words dripped with contempt. Inside the gym was stripped of every trace of the community it once sheltered. No blankets, no mattresses, no drawings taped to the walls. The hardwood floors gleamed under dim spotlights as though polished to perfection for some sinister performance. Jessica froze for a moment at the threshold, grief flooding her face. Michael gently placed a hand on her back. They moved them, Cole offered, as if it were a courtesy. "Somewhere, less public. We thought we'd have more privacy for this conversation." At the center, Brennan stood and buttoned his jacket with the calm confidence of a man in full control. "Michael," he said, his voice warm but hollow, "I'm disappointed. All that promise, all that vision. And here you are, playing dress-up with janitor keys." Michael didn't respond at first. He walked forward slowly, his eyes never leaving Brennan's face. Jessica and Marcus followed closely behind. Brennan gestured toward a pair of chairs set before the desk, like a boardroom meeting about to begin. "Let's be clear," Brennan said smoothly. "You've done your little investigation. You've seen the underbelly, and now you think you can expose it. But you and I both know what that would mean. Market collapse, job losses, lawsuits, public panic. Crestline goes under. Our competitors swoop in. Thousands pay the price. And for what? A few disgruntled employees and a charity case with delusions of grandeur." Jessica flinched, but Michael stayed silent. Brennan leaned forward. "But we don't have to go down that road. We're offering you an alternative." Cole stepped beside him, arms crossed, voice low and sharp. "We let you keep your title, your salary, your empire. You make a few public gestures, a press release about reforms, some community partnerships. Meanwhile, you drop this little game. You look the other way." He turned to Jessica, and the shelter, it disappears, quietly. No scandal, no arrests, just forgettable. Michael clenched his fists. "And if I don't," Cole's smile faded, "then you'll lose everything. We'll bury this place, and everyone who's ever set foot in it." Jessica's breath caught Marcus's stance, stiffened, and then the room went still. Michael reached into his coat and pressed a single button on his phone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then from the rafters above, small lights blinked on tiny infrared nodes embedded into the new security rig they had installed days earlier. The room, once dim and insulated, was suddenly alive with signal. Every camera, every microphone, every backup node was streaming live to secure FBI servers. Cole's eyes darted to the ceiling. Brennan's expression finally cracked. "You've been broadcasting this," Brennan snapped. Everything Marcus said, flatly stepping forward. Every word, every threat, every offer of bribery and coercion. And as of 5 minutes ago, your financial network is being frozen by federal agents. You're done. Jessica stepped forward, then her voice clear. "You threatened my brother. You used this place. You stole people's lives. Not anymore." Cole's calm veneer shattered. He lunged forward, but Marcus intercepted him, slamming him against the edge of the desk with practiced force. From the far end of the gym, the main doors burst open, and federal agents flooded in weapons drawn but restrained. Brennan stood frozen as 2 agents stepped beside him. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He just stared at Michael with a look of contempt that masked the fear in his eyes. As the agents secured the scene, Michael turned to Jessica. She was trembling, not in fear, but in relief. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked around the empty gym, now reclaimed injustice. The floor where children once played had become the site where their future had been defended. She looked to Michael, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll never believe what we built here." He smiled softly. "They will, because now we can finally show them." The morning light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael's office felt different. This time, warmer, cleaner, as though the entire building had taken a breath after holding it for far too long. He stood behind his desk, not as a janitor, not as a man pretending to investigate quietly, but as the person he truly was, Michael Grant, CEO of Crestline Technologies. The weight of that title sat heavier on his shoulders now, not because of the responsibility to shareholders or market trends, but because of the truth he had uncovered and the lives it had endangered. This office, once a symbol of privilege and control, was now a battlefield turned into a sanctuary, and at its center, sitting stiffly across from him, was Jessica Carter. She looked smaller in the daylight, the shadows of the gym no longer hiding the fatigue etched into her features. She wore the same jacket, the same expression of guarded resilience, but her eyes were searching, scanning the room. The man before her, "Everything, Mike," she said softly. Almost a question, he gave her a small smile. "My name is Michael Grant. I'm the CEO of Crestline." Her breath caught, and she leaned back slightly in her chair. "I can explain," she began, but he gently raised a hand. "You don't need to," he said. "You're not here to be questioned. You're here because everything's about to change." There was a knock at the door. Michael nodded to his assistant, who opened it to reveal 2 people who instantly made Jessica gasp. One was a federal agent badge, visible, her posture protective and strong. The other was an older man in a wheelchair with silver hair neatly combed and eyes that lit up when they met Jessica's dad. She whispered, rising slowly to her feet. "They told me," he wheeled himself forward, his hands reaching for hers. "I'm here, Mika, and I'm safe." Jessica dropped to her knees beside him, sobbing into his lap. Years of fear collapsing in a single silent moment of relief. The agent stepped forward, placing a folder on Michael's desk. "We're ready," she said. "The case has been built. The witnesses are secured. All we need now is her signature." Jessica looked up, her cheeks streaked with tears, but her gaze clearer than ever. "What about Tommy?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Michael stepped around the desk and crouched beside her. "He's safe. My team retrieved him 2 nights ago. He's in a secure location. He knows everything now. He's proud of you." Jessica looked at him, trying to process the weight of those words. Then slowly she nodded. "Then let's finish this." What followed was a whirlwind of coordinated justice. Federal agents executed warrants at Crestline's headquarters. Phoenix Financial's offices, and a string of shell companies tied to Brennan and Cole. Dozens of arrests followed in the span of 48 hours. News broke like wildfire. Morning headlines screamed about corporate corruption, labor trafficking, and an underground surveillance empire used to control and exploit. Charles Brennan, once hailed as a visionary businessman, was led out of a boardroom in handcuffs. Vincent Cole, still smug when agents arrived, had his confidence shattered when he saw the evidence videos, audio sworn testimonies. There was no way out, no legal loophole, no political favor strong enough to erase the truth. But perhaps the most powerful moment came not in a courtroom, but in the very place where the battle had been waged in silence for so long. Haven House reopened its doors this time with full legal status. Federal protection and funding approved by Crestline's newly formed Social Impact Division. Jessica stood at the front gates as families returned this time without fear. Her father sat beside her healthier than he'd been in years, thanks to proper care, and Tommy soon joined them, eager to help the very people who had once sheltered him from danger. Michael stood at a distance, watching the reunions unfold, knowing this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The empire Brennan and Cole built didn't just fall, it crumbled from within. Employees who once feared speaking out now came forward en masse. Whistleblower protections were enforced, HR systems were rebuilt, Crestline's board, restructured with the help of federal oversight, issued a formal apology, not just to the public, but directly to those affected. Jessica, now with an official title, Director of Community Empowerment, helped lead those efforts. She met with families, listened to their stories, and helped shape policies rooted not in optics, but in dignity. And every time a new family walked through the doors of Haven House, she was there, not as a survivor, but as a leader. In the final moments of that long day, Jessica stood beside Michael on the rooftop garden of Crestline's headquarters. The sun dipped low behind the skyline, casting the city in golden light. "Why did you really go undercover?" she asked, turning toward him. He looked out at the horizon, silent for a moment, "Because I stopped believing what I was being told," he finally said. "And I started believing what I was seeing. You. Them. The system wasn't just broken. It was rigged, and I knew I couldn't fix it from the top." He paused, then smiled. "So I went to the bottom, and I found the truth." Jessica nodded. "And what now?" Michael's smile faded into something more resolute. "Now we make sure this never happens again." 6 months had passed since the night it all came crashing down, since the surveillance system broadcast the truth to federal servers and the house of cards built by Brennan and Cole collapsed in full view of the world. The gymnasium that once hid Haven House's fragile operations in secrecy had been completely transformed. What was once dim, cold, and filled with whispered hope had now become a vibrant community center. Its walls painted in warm earth tones, large windows replacing the boarded ones, and the familiar sound of children laughing no longer a thing to fear. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a statement, a monument to resilience. On the front lawn stood a new sign crafted from wood, reclaimed from the original gym floor. Haven House, a place to begin again. Beneath the sign, a garden bloomed wildflowers planted by the children who had once slept on gym mats, now thrived under open skies. Inside, the layout remained familiar but elevated. The open court had been sectioned into learning pods, job training stations, and family consultation areas. Computers lined the far wall, modern, fast-connected, offering access to everything from online college applications to legal aid portals. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of warm soup being served by volunteers in the new dining area. It was alive. Jessica Carter stood near the reception desk, her ID badge now reading Director of Outreach, Crestline Foundation. The same woman who once handed out sandwiches in the dark was now overseeing a network of services that reached far beyond the city limits. She moved through the halls with the same quiet determination, but now there was no trace of the fear that had once clung to her every step. She stopped to hug a mother holding 2 toddlers, guided a teenager to a resume-building session, and nodded to a teacher preparing for the after-school tutoring program in the back classroom. She no longer had to carry this place on her own shoulders. It now stood on its own, fortified by the strength of a united community. Her brother Tommy had returned from college for spring break now, in his sophomore year studying engineering with honors. His shy smile had grown into a confident grin, and he had taken to leading workshops at the center on weekends, teaching other teens how to build circuits, code apps, and dream bigger than their zip codes. The kids adored him, so did the parents. And Jessica. She couldn't help but tear up sometimes, watching him laugh freely, knowing the weight that had nearly crushed them was now replaced with something else possibility. Their father, Manuel, now walking short distances with the help of a cane, had become something of a local figure himself. His story featured in news outlets and community forums, always framed as a testament to what happens when people are finally seen. The Crestline Foundation, once a formality created for tax benefits, had been reborn under Michael's leadership into a legitimate engine of change. It provided Haven House with consistent funding, built partnerships with local colleges and hospitals, and even helped rehouse displaced families from other cities. Monthly wellness checks, mental health counselors, and financial planning sessions were now the norm. No one had to sleep on floors anymore. No child had to whisper their dreams. The new motto painted in bold script on a mural above the main entrance read, "We don't just shelter, we build futures." Michael still visited often, but always quietly. He didn't arrive in suits or with reporters in tow. He came to sit to listen and to remind himself why the fight had been worth it. He often found Jessica standing by the old oak tree near the back where she had once waited with fear after her double shifts. Now, it was where families posed for photos, smiling, laughing, documenting their new beginnings. One afternoon he joined her beneath its branches. "You know," he said, "we could replicate this, build more centers, like it across the country." Jessica looked out across the lawn where children played tag. "We will," she said simply. "But not as charity, as a promise." And it was. Every meal served, every resume reviewed, every hug exchanged beneath Haven House's newly installed roof was a reminder that justice wasn't just about tearing down what was broken, it was about building something better in its place. And this place, born of pain and secrecy, now stood in full light, stronger than it had ever been. Not because of money, not even because of law, but because of people who refused to give up, because of one woman who turned survival into strategy, and because sometimes even the most forgotten corners of the city can grow into something beautiful if only someone is willing to fight for them. The grand hall of Haven House was filled with a kind of quiet energy, an anticipatory hum that carried through the open space like wind before a storm. Only this storm didn't bring fear, it brought clarity, it brought hope. Families filed in and took their seats beneath a high ceiling, strung with paper lanterns and string lights, casting a warm glow on the rows of folding chairs and newly polished floor. At the front of the room stood a wooden podium, simple, unadorned, except for a hand-painted sign behind it that read, "Together we begin again." On either side of the stage were photographs, children playing in the center's learning pods, parents hugging during reunification ceremonies, teens leading financial literacy workshops. But it wasn't the photos or the lights that held the room's attention. It was the woman who stepped up to the microphone. Jessica Carter stood tall, her back straight, her voice steady, but her heart thudding hard in her chest. This was more than just a speech. It was a declaration, a closing chapter, and the beginning of something far larger. 6 months ago, she began. This building was dark. It was a place people came to in silence, out of fear, out of desperation. They came with heads down, shoulders hunched, hoping to simply survive the night. Her eyes scanned the crowd, pausing on familiar faces, families who once hid in the corners, too afraid to speak, now sitting shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, co-workers, even city officials. But today, she continued, this place isn't just a shelter. It's a stage, a classroom, a home. It's where we discovered that hardship doesn't have to mean invisibility, that pain doesn't have to mean isolation, No one should ever have to face it alone. A ripple of emotion moved through the audience. Beside her, a row of Haven House volunteers, once recipients of its services, stood with matching vests and gentle smiles. People who had once been buried in debt, terrorized by predatory lenders, or silenced by shame, were now the very backbone of this movement. A young father who had once escaped with his children in the middle of the night now managed Haven's job placement program. A teenage girl once homeless now taught after-school science lessons. Jessica gestured to them with pride. They were never victims. She said they were leaders in waiting, and now they lead. As the applause began, Jessica turned slightly, catching Michael Grant's eye. He stood near the back of the room, arms folded, nodding with quiet pride. He hadn't planned to speak, but the moment felt too important. As she stepped aside, he made his way to the stage. Gone was the suit-and-tie image of Crestline's CEO. Today, he wore a button-down shirt and rolled sleeves like every other volunteer in the room. What started here, he said, was never about one company or one scandal. It was about all the systems that fail people when they need help the most. Jessica reminded us that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about presence, showing up again and again. He paused, then added, "That's why starting next quarter, the Crestline Foundation will begin developing satellite programs based on the Haven House model in 10 new cities across the country." A gasp of surprise, followed by cheers, filled the room. "We'll train leaders, not send executives. We'll invest in survivors, not saviors. We're not just rebuilding. We're reimagining what community looks like." Michael looked at Jessica, then back at the audience, and we're just getting started. Outside the city carried on as it always had. Cars, honking, sidewalks, bustling. But inside Haven House, something shifted. The applause turned into conversation. Conversations turned into plans. Volunteers mingled with funders, community organizers, with city officials, parents with policy advocates. It wasn't a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was the planting of seeds. And in the corner of the room, Jessica watched it all unfold. Her hand resting lightly on the podium where she had once spoken with trembling hands. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the wide windows of the center, she stepped outside for a moment of stillness. Tommy joined her holding a clipboard filled with names of new volunteers. "You really did it," he said quietly. Jessica shook her head. "We did it" behind them. Michael appeared holding a folder marked Haven Expansion, Phase. "Think you're ready to take this nationwide?" he asked. Jessica turned her expression calm, assured. "Not just ready," she said, "determined." And in that moment, beneath a sky streaked with hope, a movement that had once been whispered in fear finally found its voice. If this story moved you, we invite you to become part of something bigger. At Deep Inside HQ, we shine a light on the quiet battles, the unsung heroes, and the truths hidden beneath the surface. Every share, every comment, every subscription helps us keep telling these powerful stories. Stories that don't just inform, but inspire action. So if you believe in justice, dignity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, join us. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ and be part of the movement that turns awareness into change.